Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso are desperate to take control of this powerful mafia family. With 120 full members and around 1,000 associates, the Luccheses command particular respect in La Cosa Nostra, the New York mob's preferred name for itself. The Lucchese heartland is in Harlem and the Bronx, and all the previous bosses have come from that faction. But the Luccheses also command factions in Brooklyn and New Jersey.
The Lucchese family could count on the New Jersey faction for anything that they needed, whether it was a murder or whatever they wanted, they can count on New Jersey to handle it for them.
The Lucchese crime family, one of the notorious 5 families that ruled New York City's organized crime scene, has a storied history as part of the American Mafia. This Italian-American mafia family traces its roots back to the early 1920s. Originally known as the Reina family, its first leader was Gaetano Reina, who governed until his untimely murder in 1930 during the Castellamarese War, a pivotal conflict among mafia factions vying for control. Under Reina's leadership, the family primarily operated in the Bronx and parts of Manhattan, holding a monopoly over the profitable ice distribution business in the Bronx. Following Reina's assassination, the family's leadership passed to Tommy Gagliano, a skilled and quiet strategist who played a key role during the volatile Castellamarese War. Gagliano's leadership extended until his death in 1951. It was under Gagliano that the family began to develop a reputation for discretion, keeping their activities low profile while consolidating power across various industries, including trucking and the garment sector. Upon Gagliano's passing, his trusted underboss, Tommy Lucchese, took control, ushering in a new era for the family. Lucchese was not only an adept leader, but also a figure who brought the family into a period of unprecedented power. Known for his stronghold over New York's garment industry, Lucchese was instrumental in forming a formidable alliance with Carlo Gambino, the boss of the Gambino crime family. Together, Lucchese and Gambino exerted immense control over organized crime in New York City, making their respective families 2 of the most dominant forces within the mafia. Lucchese's reign from 1951 to 1967 saw the family's influence soar, particularly through its stranglehold on key industries like the garment district, labor unions, and the trucking business. His strategic partnerships with local politicians and judges ensured the family's continued success and expansion. It was during this time that the Lucchese family truly emerged as one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country, with its boss, Tommy Lucchese, sitting on the governing body known as the Mafia Commission, which was created by Lucky Luciano to regulate mafia activities and resolve disputes. When Tommy Lucchese passed away in 1967 due to a brain tumor, he left behind a family that had become synonymous with wealth and influence. His chosen successor was Carmine Tramunti, a temporary figurehead who held the position of acting boss, while awaiting the release of the intended leader, Anthony Corallo. Tramunti, however, ran into legal troubles and was arrested in 1973, leading to his eventual death 5 years later. It was Corallo, once he assumed power in the early 1970s, who took the family to new heights. Known for his secretive nature and skill in avoiding law enforcement, Corallo's leadership of the Lucchese family was one of strategic brilliance. He orchestrated complex criminal operations, focusing on expanding the family's influence and profits while maintaining a low profile to keep law enforcement at bay. Corallo's tenure culminated in his arrest during the infamous Mafia Commission trial of 1986, a trial that saw numerous mafia leaders, including Corallo, convicted of racketeering and other serious charges. After Corallo's conviction, he appointed Victor Amuso as his successor, a decision that would dramatically shift the course of the Lucchese family's history. Amuso, along with his underboss Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso, ruled with an iron fist, ushering in one of the bloodiest periods in mafia history. Known for their ruthless tactics, the duo was responsible for a wave of murders and violence that claimed the lives of many who opposed them. Casso, in particular, became infamous for ordering dozens of killings and personally carrying out many of them. His notorious alliances included corrupt NYPD detectives Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, who were involved in carrying out several murders on his behalf. Under Amuso and Casso's leadership, the family entered a period of internal strife, with numerous members either being killed or turning informant out of fear for their own lives. This eventually led to Amuso's arrest in 1991, after which he was sentenced to life in prison. His incarceration did little to diminish his influence, as Amuso continued to lead the family from behind bars, a common occurrence in the mafia world, where imprisoned bosses often maintain control over their organizations. One of the most significant developments during this turbulent time was the decision by acting boss Alphonse Darco to cooperate with authorities, becoming the first New York Mafia boss to testify against the Mafia. Darco's defection was a major blow to the Lucchese family, leading to the arrest and conviction of many of its members, including Anthony Casso, who also eventually turned informant. Despite these setbacks, the Lucchese family has managed to survive. The family has undergone several leadership changes over the years, but continues to operate, albeit on a smaller scale than during its peak under Tommy Lucchese. Today, the family remains involved in a variety of criminal enterprises, although the days of its unchecked power and influence over New York's underworld have largely passed. Historically, the early days of the Lucchese family can be traced back to the Morello crime family, one of the first mafia families in New York. The Morello family's influence waned during the 1910s, allowing figures like Gaetano Reina, Salvatore D'Aquila, and Joe Masseria to break away and form their own organizations. Reina's group eventually evolved into the Lucchese family, with Reina at its helm controlling the Bronx and parts of East Harlem. During Prohibition, Reina's wealth and influence grew exponentially, especially as he allied himself with powerful mob boss Joseph Masseria. However, the mafia landscape shifted dramatically during the Castellammare's War of 1930-31. As rival bosses fought for control of New York, Reina considered switching sides to support Masseria's rival, Salvatore Maranzano. Learning of Reina's intentions, Masseria ordered his assassination, with Tommy Galliano subsequently taking over the Reina family after betraying Masseria. In the aftermath of the Castellammare's War, Maranzano reorganized the Mafia into the 5 families that continue to operate in New York today. Gagliano was awarded leadership of the newly formed Lucchese family, with Tommy Lucchese serving as his underboss. Together, they expanded the family's operations and laid the groundwork for the powerful organization that it would become under Lucchese's leadership. While the Lucchese family's history is filled with violence and bloodshed, it is also a story of strategic alliances, cunning leadership, and a careful balance between maintaining a low profile and exerting influence in key areas. Despite numerous setbacks over the years, the family has remained a fixture in the world of organized crime, adapting to changes in the criminal landscape while staying true to its mafia roots. Today, the Lucchese family, though diminished, continues to survive as a testament to the enduring legacy of the American Mafia. In the early 1970s, Carmine Mr. Gribbs Tramunti found himself at the helm of the Lucchese crime family, although he was not in the best of health. His leadership role was intended to be temporary, holding the position until the expected release of Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo, the boss-in-waiting, who was serving time in prison. Despite this temporary status, Tramunti's reign was marked by numerous legal issues. His downfall came when he was convicted of financing a massive heroin smuggling operation known as the French Connection. This notorious scheme funneled millions of dollars worth of heroin throughout the East Coast in the early 1970s, making it one of the most significant drug trafficking rings of its time. A major twist in the French Connection saga occurred when criminals infiltrated the New York Police Department's property storage, where the seized heroin was being kept as evidence for the trial. In a bold and intricate scheme, they managed to replace the heroin with bags of flour, making off with hundreds of kilograms of the drug, valued at around $70 million. The theft was discovered when police officers noticed insects eating away at the heroin, raising suspicions that something was wrong. Investigators later concluded that corrupt NYPD officers likely aided the criminals in the heist. Several individuals involved were convicted and sentenced, including Vincent Papa, who was later assassinated in prison, along with Virgil Alessi and Anthony Loria. By 1974, Tramunti was incarcerated, paving the way for Anthony Corallo to officially take control of the Lucchese family. Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo, a key figure in the family from its Queens faction, was known for his ability to duck criminal charges, earning him his infamous nickname. Corallo's rise to power reflected the traditional Lucchese mold of a mafia boss, someone deeply entrenched in labor racketeering and closely tied to influential figures like Teamsters president Jimmy Hoffa in the 1940s and 1950s. Corallo's connections within labor unions, such as the Painters and Decorators Union, the Conduit Workers Union, and the United Textile Workers Union, further solidified his control over the family's operations. Under Corallo's leadership, the Lucchese family thrived, especially in areas such as narcotics trafficking, labor racketeering, and illegal gambling. To strengthen his inner circle, Corallo appointed Salvatore "Tom Mix" Santoro as his underboss, entrusting him with overseeing all labor and construction racketeering operations in New York. He also named Christopher "Christy Tick" Furnari as the family's consigliere. Together, they managed to elevate the Lucchese family to new heights, extending their reach and influence across various illicit industries. One of Corallo's most notable strategies was his extreme caution in discussing mafia business. Fearing law enforcement surveillance, he avoided talking shop during face-to-face meetings. Instead, he relied on the car phone in a Jaguar owned by his chauffeur and bodyguard. Corallo spent hours being driven around New York City, conducting business conversations over the phone. Salvatore "Sal" Avellino and Anelo "Neil" Migliore alternated as his drivers throughout the 1970s and 1980s, ensuring Corallo could keep a step ahead of the authorities. Corallo also played a significant role in shaping the New Jersey faction of the Lucchese family, inducting and promoting key figures like Anthony "Tumac" Acciaturo and Michael "Mad Dog" Tacchetta. He placed these men in charge of the Jersey crew, which controlled much of the loan sharking and illegal gambling activities in Newark, New Jersey during that era.
Victory celebration in Newark, New Jersey. Pablo?
Thank you, Cora. The party has moved from Terry's Bar to the Vesuvius restaurant here in Newark. And as you can see, it's a happy occasion, a happy crowd, a rather significant decision for the defendants, many of whom are here, along with their defense team, including defense attorney Maria Noto. Maria, what's your reaction at the verdict?
I am absolutely thrilled. I think that when a jury returns a verdict in a 17-month trial after 1.5 days, there's only one logical conclusion that can be drawn. And that conclusion is that these jurors are sending a message to these attorneys working for the government. And that message is that the testimony of paid witnesses with lengthy, heinous criminal records will never be an acceptable substitute for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We're absolutely thrilled. Justice has been done.
They're on a roll here today, as you can see, and they're going to be partying into the night. These are some of the events from earlier in the day.
The government's loss was the defendant's gain, and a reason to party hardy. All 20 defendants were found not guilty of racketeering charges in the longest-running crime trial in federal history. 21 months of government work down the tubes.
I certainly don't feel embarrassed, and I don't think we should feel embarrassed. I think we should feel proud for what we tried to do.
They produced the scum of the earth to testify against 20 basically good people. And I think the jury said, you know, we're not going to buy it. Forget about it.
We're very, very happy, ecstatic, and drunk.
One of the defense attorneys, Robert Brown, was elected mayor of Orange during the trial. Defense attorney John Sogluzzo said the government's case fell apart when it got to the jury. Shown here waving after the trial, they only took 2 days to deliberate.
From Terry's Bar, the party moved at 9 to the Vesuvius restaurant. Defense attorney John Sogluzzo, why do you think the government lost their case?
They weren't able to sustain a burden of proof. We had jurors there for 17 months, Pablo, and they were able to find justice in this case. That's about the extent of it. I mean, they gave it all. They spent the time. They looked over everything, and they came back with a not guilty. The government just couldn't sustain a burden of proof.
Thank you, John. Big loss for the government, big victory for the defendants and their attorneys. Reporting live from the Vesuvius restaurant in Newark, Pablo Guzman, Fox News, Channel 5. Back to you in the studio.
Okay, Pablo, thank you very much.
For the last time, the 20 defendants and their families cheered wildly. Just moments earlier, the jurors had acquitted the group of all government charges. Charges that is virtually the entire New Jersey branch of the Lucchese crime family. The defendants, led by reputed capo Anthony Acciaturo of Hollywood, Florida, and Michael Tacchetta of Florham Park, engaged in drug dealing, gambling, credit card fraud, and loan sharking. The trial took 21 months, but the jurors took just 14 hours to reach a verdict.
They sent a message to the government that they're not going to stand for anything like this ever, ever again.
The people that they brought in here to try to destroy our lives, our wives' lives, our children's lives, people were despicable. And that's why they came back in a day and a half.
As the champagne flowed at Terry's bar behind the courthouse, defense lawyers contended the government lost its case by relying too much on unsavory paid informers.
They were the type of witnesses that you would not accept anything vital in your life based upon their testimony.
I think it's entirely speculative at this point to try to say why the jury reached the particular verdict it did, or why they did so quickly.
Although the verdict was a stunning defeat for the government, which had presented 89 witnesses and 400 tapes.
Despite Corallo's precautions, the FBI eventually caught up with him in the early 1980s when they successfully planted a bug in the Jaguar he used for business. The bugging operation revealed extensive details about the Lucchese family's illegal enterprises, including gambling, labor racketeering, drug trafficking, and murder. As a result, Corallo was arrested and tried alongside the heads of New York's other major mafia families in what became known as the Mafia Commission trial. In 1985, the mafia world was shaken when Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino crime family, was assassinated without the approval of the commission. This event led to an alliance between the Genovese and Lucchese families, who plotted the murder of John Gotti, the man responsible for ordering Castellano's murder. Their efforts were partially successful, as Gambino underboss Frank De Sico was killed by a car bomb. However, the plot failed to eliminate Gotti, and the tension between the families escalated, leading to further bloodshed. In 1986, Corallo, Santoro, and Furnari were all indicted as part of the Mafia Commission trial. As the trial progressed, Corallo realized that the Lucchese hierarchy was on the verge of collapse. It became increasingly clear that he, along with Santoro and Furnari, would be convicted and sentenced to prison for the rest of their lives. In anticipation of his own downfall, Corallo selected Anthony "Buddy" Luongo to serve as the acting boss. However, Luongo mysteriously disappeared later that year, leaving the family in a state of uncertainty. Ultimately, Corallo's final decision was to appoint Vittorio "Vic" Amuso as his successor. Amuso, who had been a close associate of Christopher Furnari, officially became the boss in 1987 after Corallo, Santoro, and Furnari were sentenced to 100 years in prison. Amuso quickly named Anthony "Gaspeep" Casso as his underboss in 1989, granting Casso significant influence over the family's day-to-day decisions.
Vic and Gas are the family's biggest earners, which makes them strong contenders for the leadership. In the Mafia, everyone kicks up a percentage of their profits to the boss, so the best earners command the most respect. But Tony Ducks has a problem with the two Brooklyn captains. They are drug dealers. The assassins' names are Vittorio Amuso, or Little Vic, and Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso. The pair are so close, they are known throughout the Lucchese family as Vic and Gas.
The Lucchese family, under Amuso and Casso, descended into one of the most violent periods in mafia history. Both men had established reputations for ruthlessness, being heavily involved in labor racketeering, drug trafficking, and numerous murders. Their rivalry with Gambino boss John Gotti only fueled the bloodshed. Additionally, their alliance with Vincent "Chin" Gigante, boss of the Genovese family, further emboldened their violent reign. One of the most infamous orders issued by Amuso and Casso came when they demanded 50% of the profits generated by the Jersey crew. When the New Jersey leaders Anthony Axaturo and Michael Tachetta refused, Amuso and Casso ordered the entire crew to be eliminated. This order, dubbed the Whack Jersey Command, sent shockwaves through the mafia world. Fearful for their lives, members of the Jersey crew went into hiding, avoiding a meeting with Amuso in Brooklyn that could have been their last. Ultimately, Axaturo and Tachetta were tried in 1990, but the fallout from this order severely weakened the Jersey faction. Amuso and Casso's paranoia and increasing erratic behavior led to a series of botched hits on family members suspected of being informants. Ironically, these attempts pushed several members to cooperate with the government, further destabilizing the family. One such hit was on Peter "Fat Pete" Chiodo, a capo who had been managing the family's lucrative windows case operation. Despite being shot 12 times, Chiodo survived and later turned state's evidence after Amuso violated the Mafia's long-standing rule by ordering hits on Chiodo's wife and sister. One of the most shocking revelations from Casso's cooperation was that two NYPD detectives, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, had been working on his payroll for years. These detectives had provided Casso with sensitive information and in some cases had even carried out hits for the Lucchese family. By the time Casso was removed from the witness protection program in the late 1990s for misconduct, the damage to the Lucchese family had been done. The family's leadership had been decimated, and both Amuso and Casso would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Amuso refused all offers to become a government witness, while Casso, after years of cooperation, was sentenced to 455 years in prison. Casso died in 2020 from health complications related to COVID-19. The early 1990s brought to light a chilling revelation when Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso, a former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, exposed the involvement of two highly decorated New York City police detectives in organized crime. These detectives, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, had spent years in the NYPD not just serving the public, but also moonlighting as hitmen and informants for Casso. For much of the 1980s and early 1990s, these men used their badges to carry out illicit activities, betraying their oath of service for personal gain. Between 1986 and 1990, Ippolito and Caracappa were implicated in 8 murders and received a staggering $375,000 in bribes and payments from Casso. Their criminal activities primarily involved feeding confidential police information to the Lucchese crime family and eliminating targets on Casso's behalf. One of their key roles was to help Casso exert pressure on the rival Gambino crime family by assassinating several of their members. This move came during a time when Casso, alongside imprisoned Lucchese boss Vittorio Vic Amuso and Genovese family boss Vincent the Chin Gigante, sought to remove John Gotti, head of the Gambinos, from power. One of the most infamous acts committed by Ippolito and Caracappa was the kidnapping of James Heidel, a low-level mobster who had crossed Casso. After snatching him off the streets, they stuffed him into the trunk of their car and delivered him to Casso, who tortured and killed Heidel. To this day, Heidel's body has never been recovered. The detective's reign of terror continued with the brutal murder of Bruno Facciolo, another mobster, whose body was discovered in Brooklyn stuffed in a car trunk with a canary placed in his mouth, an ominous symbol meant to warn others about the consequences of being an informant. Their audacity knew no bounds. They also executed Gambino captain Edward "Eddie" Lino during what appeared to be a routine traffic stop, gunning him down on the expressway while he sat in his Mercedes-Benz. In April 2006, Ippolito and Caracappa were finally brought to justice. After years of evading the law, they were convicted for their roles in the murders of Heidel, Facciolo, Lino, and several others. They were sentenced to life in prison, marking the end of their corrupt careers. However, their actions were part of a larger web of criminal activity that had deeply infiltrated the New York underworld during this period. Despite being incarcerated, Vic Amuso managed to maintain control of the Lucchese family throughout much of the 1990s. His leadership was supported by Joseph "Little Joe" DeFede, who served as acting boss, and Stephen Cray, who was placed in charge of the family's labor and construction racketeering operations. DeFede oversaw the highly lucrative Garment District racket, reportedly earning up to $60,000 per month. Cray, on the other hand, expanded the family's earnings in the construction industry, bringing in between $300,000 and $500,000 annually. With these two loyal men by his side, Amuso continued to rule from behind bars, controlling the family's most profitable ventures. However, the constant pressure from law enforcement eventually caught up with the Lucchese leadership. In 1998, DeFede was arrested and indicted on 9 counts of racketeering. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a move that angered Amuso, who viewed the guilty plea as a betrayal. In response, Amuso promoted Stephen Cray to acting boss, believing that DeFede had been skimming profits from the family's rackets. As Amuso's new right-hand man, Cray strengthened the family's hold over the construction industry, overseeing extortion schemes that targeted various projects across New York City. Despite Cray's success, the law eventually caught up with him as well. In September 2000, Crea, and 7 other members of the Lucchese family were arrested and charged with extortion related to their control over construction sites. This arrest marked a significant blow to the family's leadership. With Crea behind bars, Louis Lou Bagels Didone, the family's consigliere, stepped in to run the organization. However, Didone's time at the helm was brief. After his release from prison, Joseph Defeed, fearing for his life, turned government witness. His testimony, along with that of former Lucchese underboss Alphonse Darco, helped secure Didone's conviction for murder and conspiracy in 2003. By the early 2000s, the Lucchese family's leadership was in disarray. Amuso, still imprisoned, decided to establish a 3-man ruling panel to oversee the family's operations. This panel included Capos Anelo Miglior, Joseph DiNapoli, and Madonna. Together, they worked to restore the family's influence, particularly in the Bronx, where much of their power had been based. Despite these efforts, the Lucchese family continued to face relentless pressure from law enforcement. In 2007, members of the family were implicated in Operation Heat, a New Jersey-based investigation that uncovered a $2.2 billion illegal gambling and money laundering ring. Several key members, including Joseph DiNapoli and Madonna, were arrested as a result of the investigation. 2 years later, in 2009, the Lucchese family was hit with another wave of indictments. A total of 49 members and associates were charged with racketeering, bribery, and extortion, among other crimes. The indictments exposed the family's continued involvement in illegal gambling, loan sharking, and the trafficking of firearms and drugs. As law enforcement intensified its crackdown on organized crime, the Lucchese family found itself increasingly weakened. The once powerful ruling panel was disbanded, and Madonna took over as acting boss, with Joseph DiNapoli serving as consigliere. Meanwhile, Stephen Crea, who had been released from prison in 2009, rejoined the family's leadership, marking his return to power. However, this resurgence was short-lived. In May 2017, 19 members and associates of the Lucchese family, including Madonna, Crea, and DiNapoli, were indicted on charges ranging from racketeering and fraud to attempted murder and drug trafficking. One of the most notable allegations in this indictment involved the 2013 murder of Michael Meldish, a former hitman and leader of the East Harlem Purple Gang. Lucchese associates Terrence Caldwell and Christopher Londonio were accused of carrying out the hit, allegedly on orders from the family's leadership. The investigation also revealed that Crea had authorized several other murder attempts, including a failed plot to kill an informant in New Hampshire. By 2020, the Lucchese family had suffered significant setbacks. Many of its top leaders, including Madonna, Christopher Londonio, and Terrence Caldwell, were convicted for their roles in the Meldish murder and sentenced to life in prison. Stephen Crea, who had been a dominant figure in the family for decades, was also sentenced to life in prison, along with a hefty fine and the forfeiture of millions in assets. The once dominant Lucchese crime family, which had thrived on corruption, extortion, and violence, was now a shadow of its former self, crippled by years of internal strife, betrayals, and relentless law enforcement pressure. Yet, the story of Ippolito and Caracappa, 2 detectives who had betrayed their badges to serve as mob hitmen, remains one of the most shocking chapters in the long history of organized crime in New York City. Their actions not only brought shame to the NYPD, but also revealed the depths of corruption that had allowed the Lucchese family to operate with impunity for so many years. In 2023, Victor Amuso, despite being imprisoned for life, remains recognized as the official head of the Lucchese crime family. This family, one of the 5 families of New York, has maintained significant influence in organized crime for decades. Amuso's leadership, though behind bars, continues to shape the family's operations, with trusted figures executing his commands. One of the most notable crackdowns on the Lucchese family occurred in March 2018 during Operation The Vig Is Up. Law enforcement, led by New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, uncovered one of the largest loan sharking operations ever investigated by the U.S. Attorney General's office. Dominic Capelli, a Lucchese crime family soldier, along with 9 associates, was arrested in connection with the operation. They were accused of targeting over 47 individuals, entrapping them in a vicious cycle of debt with exorbitant interest rates, often exceeding 200% annually. Victims were charged these rates on loans they felt pressured to take, creating long-term financial traps. The operation reportedly operated out of New Rochelle, New York, and the Bronx, a hub for many of the family's illicit activities. Alongside loan sharking, the defendants were also linked to an illegal bookmaking operation that handled more than $1.5 million in wagers each year, further highlighting the family's reach into gambling and financial crime. Just a month later, in April 2018, more Lucchese members found themselves facing justice. Anthony Grado, another soldier of the Lucchese crime family, and his associate Lawrence "Fat Larry" Trenise were charged in a separate indictment. Between 2011 and 2013, the two coerced a Brooklyn-based doctor into prescribing over 230,000 oxycodone pills, a key substance in the opioid crisis that has ravaged communities across the United States. Grado's intimidation tactics were ruthless. At one point, he ordered an associate to stab the doctor during a visit, and it was reported that the doctor complied with the criminal enterprise out of fear for his life. Grado's chilling threat, caught on record, underscored the level of control he exerted. "If the prescriptions go in anybody's hands besides mine, I'll put a bullet right in your head." The subsequent investigation was extensive and expensive, costing over $1 million and involving wiretaps, hidden cameras, car bugs, and undercover officers. Both Grado and Trenise pleaded guilty on April 5, 2018. Grado was sentenced to 12 years in prison, while Trenise received just over 3 years behind bars, a striking contrast in the severity of their penalties. The violence associated with the Lucchese family didn't stop with threats. In October 2018, associate Vincent Zito was found murdered in his Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn home. He was discovered with 2 gunshot wounds to the back of his head, execution style. A handgun was found near his body, suggesting that Zito may have been involved in some form of retaliation or internal dispute. Zito, who was allegedly involved in loan sharking himself, had a family connection to the Lucchese crime family through his brother, Anthony Zito. Anthony was jailed for extortion in the 1970s and had long-standing ties to the Lucchese leadership, further demonstrating how deep and interwoven these family connections run within the organization. By May 2019, more light was shed on the inner workings of the Lucchese crime family when former soldier John Panisi turned government witness. His testimony provided valuable insights into the family's hierarchy, particularly in the trial of Eugene Castell. Panisi revealed that the Lucchese family had 7 active crews, with operations stretching across New York City, Long Island, New Jersey, and Staten Island. He also disclosed a power struggle that had unfolded in 2017. In a rare move, Amuso, still exerting influence from prison, wrote a letter to underboss Stephen Cray. The letter dictated that Michael "Big Mike" DeSantis, a Brooklyn-based mobster, would take over as acting boss, replacing Matthew Madonna, who hailed from the Bronx. This directive caused tension between the Brooklyn and Bronx factions of the family. According to Panisi, Amuso approved a hit list targeting several Bronx members if they refused to step aside, signaling the violent lengths the family was willing to go to enforce order. Law enforcement confirmed Panisi's claims about the family's leadership changes, noting that Patrick "Patty" Delarusso had become the acting underboss and Andrew DeSimone had assumed the role of consigliere. The Lucchese family's involvement in violent and illegal activities continued to make headlines in the years following. On December 16, 2020, John Perna, a soldier in the Lucchese family, pleaded guilty to an aggravated assault charge related to a high-profile attack. Perna had been hired by Thomas Manzo, the ex-husband of Dina Canton, a television personality from The Real Housewives of New Jersey. In exchange for carrying out the assault on Canton's current husband, Perna received a discounted rate for his wedding reception, illustrating how organized crime figures continue to infiltrate legitimate business dealings. Manzo was later implicated in the plot as well, facing charges for his role in orchestrating the attack. Fast forward to September 13, 2022, when 5 more members and associates of the Lucchese family were arrested in connection with a wide-ranging illegal gambling operation. Among those indicted was Anthony Villani, a family soldier, and associates James "Quick" Cumuzzos, Dennis Filizzola, Michael "Platinum" Prano, and Louis "Tooch" Tucci Jr. These individuals were accused of running a long-running scheme that involved racketeering, money laundering, illegal gambling, and attempted extortion. This latest arrest demonstrated that despite law enforcement's ongoing efforts to disrupt organized crime, the Lucchese family and other similar syndicates continue to operate sophisticated, profitable, and often violent criminal enterprises. While many of the family's key members have been imprisoned or prosecuted, the Lucchese crime family remains resilient. Even with figures like Victor Amuso serving life sentences, they managed to maintain their influence over operations through trusted lieutenants. With leadership constantly evolving and younger generations stepping into the roles once held by their predecessors, the organization continues to pose a formidable challenge to law enforcement agencies working to dismantle its vast criminal network. Despite years of crackdowns, the Lucchese family's deep roots in loan sharking, gambling, extortion, and drug trafficking ensure their presence on the streets remains strong. Their enduring legacy serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle to combat organized crime in modern society. Joseph Joey D. DiNapoli, born on July 12, 1935, is a former consigliere in the Lucchese crime family, a prominent Italian-American mafia organization. DiNapoli's involvement in organized crime spanned several decades, and he played a key role in the family's activities. His brothers, Vincent and Louis DiNapoli, are also notable figures in the underworld, though they were members of the rival Genovese crime family. Additionally, Joey D. was associated with the notorious East Harlem Purple Gang, a criminal organization with ties to narcotics trafficking and violent crime in New York during the mid-20th century. DiNapoli's troubles with the law began early. In 1969, he was arrested in New York on charges related to illegal gambling. Just a few years later, in 1973, DiNapoli faced more serious accusations. Along with Pat DeLazio, he was charged with possessing 2 kilograms of heroin with the intent to distribute. Further, he was implicated alongside Frank Butch Pugliese in other narcotics-related offenses. One high-profile incident in the early 1970s saw DiNapoli and Vincent Papa, a fellow criminal associate, arrested with a suitcase containing nearly $1 million in cash, evidence of the vast sums involved in their illicit operations. By 1974, DiNapoli's criminal enterprise had caught up with him, along with several co-defendants, including prominent figures such as William Alonzo, Joseph Cariale, and Carmine Tramunti. DiNapoli was convicted on multiple counts of violating federal narcotics laws. During this case, authorities uncovered DiNapoli's significant involvement in loan sharking, a form of predatory lending often accompanied by violence. As a result, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. His legal troubles did not end there. In 1975, DiNapoli was once again convicted, this time for extortion and tax evasion. He received a hefty sentence of 21 years, but was released from prison in 1982 after serving less than half of his time. Upon his release, DiNapoli resumed his criminal activities, this time working with his brothers under Genovese family boss Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno. The DiNapoli brothers were heavily involved in construction racketeering, using their influence to extort contractors and control the use of union and non-union workers on major construction projects in New York and New Jersey. In 1981, DiNapoli, who had risen to the rank of caporegime, was indicted on charges related to labor racketeering and extortion. Throughout the 1990s, DiNapoli's criminal activities continued. In 1993, he was indicted on federal loan sharking charges and 2 years later was convicted and sentenced to 30 months in prison. That same year, DiNapoli faced additional legal challenges, including indictments for federal mail fraud and state racketeering. The latter case involved a scheme in which DiNapoli and his brother Louis fraudulently obtained millions of dollars in asbestos removal and construction contracts meant for minority-owned businesses. By exploiting programs designed to assist underrepresented groups, the DiNapolis enriched themselves at the expense of legitimate minority entrepreneurs. For these crimes, DiNapoli was convicted and sentenced to another 3 years in prison. Despite these setbacks, DiNapoli remained a key figure in the Lucchese crime family. In 2000, after a major indictment related to the Lucchese construction group, authorities identified DiNapoli as a capo in the family. His crew included soldiers such as Philip Di Simone and Arthur Zambardi, who were arrested alongside other high-ranking Lucchese members. In the early 2000s, DiNapoli's role within the Lucchese family grew even more prominent. After the family's imprisoned boss, Vic Amuso, appointed a ruling panel in 2003, DiNapoli, along with Anelo Miglior and Madonna, took control of the family's day-to-day operations. However, in 2007, DiNapoli was arrested again, this time as part of a massive operation known as Operation Heat. Law enforcement uncovered a $2.2 billion gambling and racketeering ring that spanned from New Jersey to Costa Rica. In 2009, DiNapoli was indicted once more, this time for racketeering related to gambling, loan sharking, and extortion, a scheme that had allegedly netted $400 million. In 2016, DiNapoli pleaded guilty to racketeering charges and received a sentence of 3 years in New Jersey State Prison. He also faced a separate sentence of 1 to 3 years for his involvement in an illegal gambling operation in New York. Both sentences were served concurrently. In 2017, DiNapoli, along with several other Lucchese leaders, was indicted for racketeering, murder, narcotics trafficking, and firearms offenses. DiNapoli ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 52 months in prison, along with a $250,000 fine. On January 11, 2023, DiNapoli was released from prison, bringing an end to his long and tumultuous criminal career. Neil Miglior, born Anelo in Queens, New York in October 1933, rose through the ranks of the Lucchese crime family, becoming one of its most influential members. Throughout his life, he held several key positions, including capo, acting consigliere, and underboss on the family's ruling panel. Migliore's criminal career was shaped by close ties to notable bosses such as Tommy Lucchese and Anthony Corallo, two pivotal figures in the Lucchese family. His induction into the family came through Joseph Laratro, a capo with deep connections to illegal gambling operations in Corona, Queens. By the late 1950s, Migliore was already overseeing much of Laratro's illicit gambling activities, which included bookmaking, policy operations, and large telephone setups. Migliore quickly established himself as a highly profitable earner. By 1957, he was reportedly generating up to $50,000 a day from his gambling operations in New York City. He paid tribute to his superiors, but kept a substantial income for himself, solidifying his power and influence within the organization. His involvement in the infamous Appalachian Meeting in November 1957 further elevated his standing. The Appalachian Meeting, a national summit of Cosa Nostra leaders in upstate New York, was intended to solidify relationships and settle disputes within the Mafia, but it was famously interrupted by law enforcement. Miglior was suspected of driving boss Tommy Lucchese and underboss Steve LaSalle to the meeting. The very next day, he was involved in a car accident in Binghamton, New York, raising suspicions that he was supposed to attend the meeting, though he escaped formal charges at the time. Miglior's career was marked by brushes with law enforcement, but he was able to avoid serious legal consequences for many years. On October 22, 1974, he was indicted alongside several other associates on bribery charges related to protecting a gambling operation in Queens. At this time, he was representing the family's interest in Northbury Concrete, a Brooklyn-based contractor as part of the New York City Concrete Club, a notorious group that controlled the concrete industry in the city. Miglior also held a position as a salesman with Port Dock and Stone, one of the main suppliers of trap rock to the concrete companies that dominated the industry. His involvement in these businesses allowed him to exert considerable control over lucrative construction contracts in New York. Miglior's power extended far beyond the gambling world. On March 21, 1986, he was indicted on extortion and bid-rigging charges alongside Genovese family members and several businessmen. The charges alleged that Miglior and his co-conspirators had rigged the bidding process for supplying concrete to major construction projects in Manhattan, including the Trump Plaza and medical facilities such as Mount Sinai School of Medicine and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. This indictment marked a significant moment in Miglior's career, as it highlighted his deep involvement in both the Mafia and the legitimate business world. Although his influence within the Lucchese family was vast, the charges ultimately led to his conviction. In 1988, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison and fined $266,000. However, Migliore's legal troubles were far from over. In 1991, his conviction was overturned, and he was released from prison. Despite his time behind bars, Migliore continued to maintain his influence within the Lucchese family. He took on a legitimate role as a sales representative in the concrete business, allowing him to remain involved in the family's operations. On April 3, 1992, Miglior narrowly survived an assassination attempt while attending a friend's granddaughter's birthday party at a restaurant in Westbury, Long Island. A shooter fired several shotgun blasts through the restaurant's window, hitting Miglior in the neck and upper body. Despite his severe injuries, he survived the attack, which was seen as a power move within the Mafia underworld. By 2003, Miglior was reported to be part of a 3-man ruling committee running the Lucchese family. Along with Matthew Madonna and Joseph DiNapoli, Miglior was seen as the most influential figure on the committee, especially given his long-standing history and deep connections to previous bosses. His position within the family remained strong until his death on September 11, 2019, marking the end of an era for one of the Lucchese family's most powerful figures. Matthew Madonna was a notorious figure in the world of organized crime, particularly as a key player in the Lucchese crime family, one of the infamous 5 families of the Mafia in New York. Born in the Bronx, New York, Madonna climbed through the Mafia ranks, eventually becoming the acting boss of the Lucchese family in the early 2000s. His rise to power was largely due to his involvement in numerous criminal activities, including drug trafficking, extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling. In 1959, while serving time at Greenhaven Correctional Facility in New York, Matthew Madonna met Nicky Barnes, a rising drug dealer from Harlem. After their release, Madonna began supplying large amounts of heroin to Barnes. The operation was simple. Madonna would leave a car filled with heroin at a Manhattan parking lot, and Barnes would later pick it up and swap it for cash. This arrangement continued until 1975, when Madonna was arrested for drug trafficking. By December 1976, he was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. In December 1981, still behind bars, Madonna was summoned to testify before a grand jury about drug activities in New York. Despite being granted immunity, he refused to testify twice, which led to a contempt of court charge and an additional 528 days on his sentence. In 1995, after 20 years in prison, Madonna was released. By 1998, he had been inducted into the Lucchese crime family, rewarded for his loyalty and silence. His status grew, and he eventually became a capo. Though he returned to prison, he was released in 2003. Following the conviction of several Lucchese leaders, including Stephen Crea and Louis Didone, a 3-man ruling panel was established. Madonna, Anelo Miglior, and Joseph DiNapoli governed the family. In 2007, Madonna and 32 others were arrested in Operation Heat, which exposed a $2.2 billion illegal gambling and money laundering ring. They allegedly operated through Costa Rica, collecting bets on sports and races. In 2010, Madonna, DiNapoli, and others were indicted for racketeering. In 2008, Madonna reportedly held a job at Big Geyser Inc., New York's largest health beverage distributor, though it was suspected to be a no-show position. As leadership evolved, Madonna became acting boss after the ruling panel disbanded in 2009. He was later indicted in another racketeering scheme involving loan sharking, illegal gambling, and extortion. He pled not guilty, and the trial was delayed. By 2013, Madonna had taken part in a secret mob initiation. In 2015, he pled guilty to the 2007 racketeering charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, before his release, Madonna was again charged in 2017 with racketeering, including ordering the 2013 murder of Michael Meldish, leader of the East Harlem Purple Gang. Testimony in 2019 revealed that imprisoned Lucchese boss Vic Amuso had ordered Madonna to step down, making way for new leadership. On November 15, 2019, Madonna and several others were convicted for the murder of Michael Meldish. He was sentenced to life in prison in July 2020 and remains incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in McCreary, Kentucky. John Pennisi was a soldier in the Lucchese crime family, one of the 5 families that dominated organized crime in New York City. He grew up in the Bronx and got involved in the Mafia, working under various family members. Unlike some mobsters, Pennisi didn't rise to power through acts of extreme violence, but rather through connections, loyalty, and by adhering to the mob's rules. Pennisi became part of the Lucchese family in the late 1990s, but it wasn't until the 2010s that he became more prominent. His role was mainly in extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling operations, typical mafia revenue streams. He was not primarily involved in drug dealing, but made money through other illegal means like loan sharking, where victims would be charged exorbitant interest rates on borrowed money. Conflicts arose within the Lucchese family as internal disputes regarding leadership surfaced. Tensions boiled over in 2017 when Victor Amuso, the boss of the family, sent a letter from prison changing the leadership structure. This caused a rift between Bronx-based members of the family and those in Brooklyn, where Pennisi was aligned. Fearing for his life after a series of events that made him believe his own associates were planning to kill him, Pennisi decided to cooperate with the government in 2018.
How did it feel to be a made man? You take this oath saying you'll never do this. You know that the penalty for this is death. And now you're publicly getting on the stand and breaking everything that you signed up for.
Well, the people that you were speaking about that put these rules into place, and it was well before my time, followed the rules. The present day of the guys that put the false wire on me broke the rules.
As a government witness, Panisi testified against numerous members of the Lucchese family, including Eugene Castell. His detailed testimony helped uncover internal workings and leadership disputes, and he exposed a hit list approved by the imprisoned boss that could have led to several murders. His cooperation led to convictions of key figures within the family. Panisi's decision to flip was considered a major betrayal within the Mafia, as the organization operates under a strict code of silence, omerta. His testimony had a significant impact, resulting in indictments and imprisonments of high-ranking members, further destabilizing the Lucchese family. He revealed crucial information about the family's leadership, operations, and their attempts to consolidate power, which helped federal prosecutors take down several mobsters. In May 2019, former Lucchese family member John Panisi testified that the Lucchese crime family operates with 7 distinct crews across various regions: 2 in the Bronx, 2 on Long Island, 1 in Manhattan, 1 in New Jersey, and 1 in Brooklyn. The Bronx faction Anthony Blue Santarelli. A longtime Capo regime, Santarelli runs a Bronx crew and previously led the Tanglewood Boys, a Lucchese recruitment gang in the 1990s. Acting capo Alfred Freddy Boy Santarelli. Alfred currently acts as capo of his father's Bronx crew. Joseph Joey Relay Lubrano heads another Bronx-based crew. He was arrested in May 2010 on charges of armed robbery and racketeering. The FBI identified him as a key figure in the Arthur Avenue area. He was released from prison in October 2014. Frank Skinny Frank Salerno, a Capo regime who once belonged to the Bronx Crea crew, Salerno took over after Stephen Crea's imprisonment in 2017. In 2020, Salerno was photographed meeting with Lucchese family leaders, including acting boss Mike DeSantis and consigliere Andrew DeSimone. The Long Island faction Carmine Avellino, leading the Long Island Queens crew, Avellino was charged in 2014 with orchestrating an assault over a debt. He pled guilty to extortion in 2016 and was sentenced to 1 year of house arrest and probation. Joseph Joe Cafe Decina. A Capo regime who operates from Cafe Napoli in Little Italy, Decina started his criminal career with the Gambino family before joining the Lucchese family. His nephew is a known associate of Gambino capo Ignazio Alonga. The Brooklyn Staten Island faction Patrick Patty Delarusso, once capo of the Long Island Brooklyn crew, Delarusso briefly held the position of acting underboss before stepping down. In 2021, he was promoted to consigliere. Georgie Neck Zappola currently oversees the Brooklyn Staten Island crew and has strong ties to former Lucchese underboss Anthony Casso. After serving 22 years for multiple murders, Zappola was released from prison in 2014. Several key figures were sentenced to long prison terms. For instance, Madonna, Crea Sr. and others were convicted in 2019, with Madonna and Crea receiving life sentences for their roles in the Meldish murder and other criminal activities. What made this case particularly impactful was the role of informants from within the Lucchese family, including relatives of mobsters. Informants such as Joseph Foti and the son of Lucchese soldier James Pasqua Jr. secretly recorded conversations that contributed to the conviction of their family members and associates. The indictments and cooperation from insiders severely weakened the Lucchese family's leadership and disrupted their operations, dealing a significant blow to the Mafia's structure in New York.